Hey, this is Jonathan Gilliam. I'm about to start the show, and I only wanted to give myself 30 seconds to do this commercial, so that means I got about 25 more seconds. So go get Sheep No More, The Art of Awareness and Attack Survival, my best-selling book. It's got some good stories in it from when I was in the FBI and some stuff about the SEAL teams, but overall, what it does is it teaches you how to look at yourself from the attacker's point of view so that you can be safer and more aware. It's got 2 workbooks that go with it so you can actually apply what you learned. And for the children, The Adventures of Team Little Bigs, a parent's book for children. It's a book of pictures, and then the parents go to teamlittlebigs.com where the lesson plans are at and some other stuff for the kids. So overall, a little bit more than 30 seconds. Sheep No More, The Art of Awareness and Attack Survival. It's 2 workbooks, and The Adventures of Team Little Bigs. Go get them wherever books are sold, and let's start the show. 48 seconds, that wasn't bad.
The truth has arrived.
My name is Jonathan Gilliam, and this is The Experts. And happy Monday to everybody out there. And this is going to be, I'm moving, shaking today. Not shaking physically, but I'm moving and shaking. And so I said last Friday that I was going to talk a little bit more about today about this article that was on Time. And it reads like, it's unbelievable. It reads like a confession of the left and what they did to get themselves in a position over the past year in order to really take this election, not just from these electronic voting machines, which I just do not trust these voting machines. I don't care who you are. You got to admit, if your phone gets hacked, your computer gets hacked, how in the world are you going to trust a voting machine that, listen, I'm not personally, I don't have this stuff with me, but you can get your phone hacked just by walking past somebody who has the right equipment, right? You log on somewhere to a wireless service, like cell service or something like that on your computer or your iPad, they can hack it, right? I never trusted anything. Once we went past literally a paper ballot, I didn't even like the ones like they had in Florida that caused the controversy about the hanging chads. There used to just be where you just mark in with a pen where the arrow that you wanted to go to that person that you're voting for, and that's it. And then it was hand counted. Once we got away from that, it gets more and more dangerous because technology can easily be hacked by bad people. Quite often it's the people who create the technology that end up hacking it. So beyond that, what I was talking about last Friday is how the left has organized over really the past 80 years, this organization, and how it's grown in media, in journalism, in social media now, and in activism, and also, which was pointed out, especially last Friday when I was going through this story, in the big money donors. It used to be that people who were big business people were conservative. Now, I don't know what to do. Actually, I do know what it is. They're globally minded because global means more money. They don't realize, or maybe they do, and they just don't care, that they're dancing with the devil when they start backing that, right? They know they can get products and things made cheaper overseas. When you look at the whole world versus your nation, the amount of customers skyrockets. So they think globally because they just can't have enough money. That's the other thing. It's ridiculous. How much money do you need? There's only so much life in the years that you're going to live. There's only so much life that you can actually live and carry out. And there's only so much money you can spend. And the greed is just completely out of control now. That's a whole nother subject we're going to go down eventually. We've kind of covered that before, the ethics and the morals and philosophizing greed in this world, really. But when you look at and I like to call this that deep state family tree, the evil family tree, not just of Washington, D.C., but the tentacles go all over the place. But it's really the left and in Washington, D.C., and politics in general just goes, it's all over the place now. And it's a mixture of just this family tree of evil. So as I was pointing out last Friday, this isn't something that just happened over the last year. This has been a system that has been growing for at least 80 years, at least since the end of World War II. So, and I said I wanted to save the end of this story or this article until today, because this is almost like, or it really is good enough when we talk about what happened that night of the election. And from there, we can then go back and look at what happened over the past 80 years. So there were different, as I was talking about last Friday, there were different chapters in this article. And when you get down to the end, showing up and standing down, this was the thing that if you didn't understand, if you didn't listen to Friday's show, go listen to it, because you're going to understand how these people work together and how they've got these relationships together. And what you see now in the last part of this, especially showing up and standing down, that's the title that they used for this chapter. It's going to show you not only how organized they are, but how quickly they can adjust, right? Because the people that lead all these different groups and activists and big money donors and all these different limbs and roots of the family tree, their leaders are, it's not a lot of people. They're very coordinated, and they own Silicon Valley. So the technology they have to communicate and the ability to for them not to get noticed and recognized is, I mean, it's virtually impossible for the right, especially if you're not super wealthy. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about Cuomo at the end of this, because it kind of plays into this, how they kind of, when it gets to certain points, and this is an important thing for us to realize, and I'll share this in the end, is that if they have a crack in that system and the right is not asleep, then we can pounce on that, and you can bring down a portion of it. It's happening in California with Newsom. It's happening in New York with this murderous, megalomaniac, psychopathic narcissist Cuomo. It kind of fits all of these categories. So showing up and standing down. This is very interesting. I'm not going to read it word for word, but I'm kind of skim through it, because you're going to get this as I start to talk. Remember, what I want you to focus on is, we know how organized they were, not just because of 2020, not just because of the virus, not because of Trump, and they were angry over the past 4 years. In fact, the past 4 years was an example of how they can organize and keep people off their game. Let me just make this little caveat, though, okay? Because this is very important as you listen to this, because you're going to hear what they did right here. What they did wrong, another crack in their plan, which was this impeachment trial that happened, and they lied and changed statistics, and they changed evidence basically in this impeachment hearing that failed for the Democrats. One of the things is, and I did a little tweet out, a meme of this, is that if you have to cheat to win, you will always be dependent upon cheating. And that's the thing, is that the left is dependent on cheating, because what they're trying to do is dependent on control, and it's dependent upon manipulation of the people, right? So first of all, if you have to cheat to win, you will always be dependent on cheating. And that's the left. They are dependent upon it until they convince or snow or manipulate enough people. They have to cheat. The other thing on this meme, it said, if you have to rig the system in order to gain control of the system, your system will never work, right? And that's what they do. They rig the system. As I was talking about last Friday, and all through that article, this confession letter, it is a rigged system. Anywhere the Democrats get in, they're going to rig the system. And the third part of that was, if your vision of society is dependent upon manipulation of the people, then you will always be a manipulator and never a leader. And that is so true. I'm so glad that God put this knowledge in my brain, because when I look throughout my career, remember, a lot of these lessons, a lot of these things that I come up with, I'm not just coming up with them because they sound good. I've had experiences in my life where I'm at the tip of the spear, the top of achieving these things that everybody else wishes that they could have done. And inevitably, the Bureau especially was ripe with this. And as we can see, even the SEAL teams now with these executives like McRaven, just weirdos. McRaven, is the admiral that retired and was a huge Hillary Clinton supporter. These people throughout the whole, if I look back on them and their leadership styles, a lot of it had to do with manipulation. It had to do with trickery and convincing people that they were something that they're not, rigging the system, cheating. And you see that with Cuomo, with Gavin Newsom in California, with Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan. You see this in all these Democrats, with Joe Biden, with Kamala Harris. I mean, the amount of, like, I talked to a guy, a good friend of mine who's a cop in San Francisco. He's been out there for years and years. He said, believe it or not, Kamala Harris, and he's not a liberal, he said Kamala Harris actually used to be a cop's prosecutor. Like, she was there to, like, she was a hard prosecutor, and something happened along the way. Now she's just this leftist weirdo. It's because when you use trickery and cheating and rigging the system in order to get to a point, when you manipulate people to get to a point, who you were, if you were a good person, is lost. It's gone. Once you cheat, remember, how they always say, for cops especially, never take a bribe, because once you take a bribe, you will always be dependent on taking bribes, because now you have to deal with these people. Even if you did it one time, you're going to have to go down that road, because they will approach you again and again and again. So when we apply these things to this story and to the reality of the left, that's exactly what we see. So election night, and as I read to this, I'm questioning, because it sounds to me like they, after the fact, they're putting this out there to kind of cover up what they really did, but also to brag a little bit, which is what always gets criminals caught. They try to cover stuff up, and then look at Cuomo. They cover it up, and then they brag about it, or they're nasty to the people that they had actually been attacking, and they get caught. So election night goes on. Election night began with many Democrats despairing. Trump was running ahead of pre-election polling, winning Florida, Ohio, and Texas easily, and keeping Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania too close to call. But Podhorzer, and that's the guy, remember I told you about, he's the political guru for the AFL-CIO. He was the guy that, at least in the story, was the organizer of this whole thing, kind of the guy who came up with the brainstorm and the idea. Again, I don't believe all this, and I said this last Friday. I that's the part of the story I don't believe. I don't think that they just figured this out overnight and just went, just crazy, defeating everybody and organizing. I think that they organized quickly because they were able to, because they have 80 years of this relationship going on and learning on what they've done wrong. But again, their winnings are based on cheating, based on rigging the system, and based on manipulating people. So that's what they're dependent upon as well. So Podhorzer was unperturbed when he spoke that night, and the returns were exactly in line with his modeling. So how Podhorzer came up with this modeling is beyond me, because there was, if you looked at the reality of what was being projected, Trump was going to win in a landslide. The Democrats, Joe Biden was nowhere to be found. The Democrats basically did not run a campaign with Joe Biden. They just pop up every now and then like a mole in the ground. They go back down, disappear for 2 weeks. And Trump didn't bury himself, okay? He didn't do himself any favors with like how he ran COVID and his relationship with the QAnon weirdos, but he didn't bury himself. He didn't. And his projections to win did not match what this guy Podhorzer said, unless, which they don't mention in this story, he knew something that we didn't know, which is probably the case when it comes to the machines and so on and so forth. I mean, I'm no Mike Lindell freak and going to go out on a limb and say all these different things, because quite frankly, the evidence that probably was there is not there any longer, and the Democrats and Republicans own, basically the whole entire election process. And the problem with the Republican establishment is that they are made up of people who basically compromise and bend over backwards and don't ever, because they don't want to lose. They have the same problem: lie, cheat, and steal, manipulate people in order to get to where they're at. I'm talking about the establishment here. I know some incredible Republicans, but the establishment, the very top, it's broken, needs to be fixed. And they have the same problem. When they try to be honest, they're still dependent upon the manipulation and the cheating and the rigging the system. So they go right along with this stuff. Again, the establishment, right? Establishment, the people who you cannot trust in the Republican Party, and the entire Democrat Party combined. That's what you get. So I don't know where his projections were coming from, but I have a feeling they knew a little bit more about how this was going to work out than we did, and that's why it all worked out in the middle of the night, and it didn't work out during the day. Now, the returns were somehow exactly in line with Pod Horser. What a name, by the way. The returns were that the Trump voters' turnout was surging. As the numbers dribbled out, he could tell that as long as all the votes were counted, Trump would lose. Now, here's an interesting thing, right? So what a weird statement that is. As long as all the votes were counted, what he's referring to there is the mail-in ballots and the votes that were mailed in, which weren't counted by and large for some strange reason until later on in the evening. You would think that that's what they would initially start counting, right? But for some weird reason, the mail-in ballots were still trickling in or didn't even come in until later, and they were counted. Very suspicious, right? Which the other thing, along with electronic voting, mail-in ballots, it's open for complete corruption. If you don't see a person in front of you, and you don't see them marking a piece of paper, and you don't take that paper and set it in a secured location, and then monitor the people counting that vote, you're not going to know anything about the reality of that vote. You're not. I don't care if you do what I did in Arkansas, where you go on the screen, and after you vote, it prints out a receipt. You can look at it and say, okay, that's correct on a receipt. And then you hand that receipt. They don't take that receipt and then use that as your ballot. They then put that into another electronic machine, right? So this is very interesting. I don't know if this is the way it is at all the places, but okay, they say, well, it's not tampered with. The voting machine is not tampered with. Okay, it's not tampered with. I have a receipt that says exactly what I voted for. What about this other machine that counts the vote and puts that in there? Those are two different machines. Nobody's ever brought that up. I don't know what my vote was actually counted, because when it went into that machine, it's not like you have no way to log on anywhere and make sure that your vote is still being counted there. And even if it was, right, even if it was, you could log on somewhere and make sure that your vote was there. How do you know, unless they do an audit, that is really what your vote is? You don't. So that's why this guy's confidence in this story, and how he's saying that as the numbers dribbled in, he could tell that as long as all the votes were counted, Trump would lose. How would he know? How would he possibly have known that, unless he knew more than we do or did? The Liberal Alliance, the story says, the Liberal Alliance gathered for an 11 p.m. Zoom call. Now, what's interesting is he's very confident. All this was happening before 11 p.m., right? Well, all the votes that won Joe Biden the election didn't come in until in the middle of the night. So right there's a crack in the story, big time. Hundreds joined. Many were freaking out, the story says. It was really important for me and the team in that moment to help ground people in what we had already known was true. That's what Podzer was saying. Oh, no, that's Angela Peoples who said that. Director for the Democracy Defense Coalition. Ugh. Whenever they throw the word coalition in there, kills me. Podhorser presented data to show the group that victory was in hand. Again, this is at 11 p.m. This is before the spike, which he has no idea of knowing, right? If he knew this spike was going to happen, how did nobody else know that this spike was going to happen, right? It was a mystery to everybody else. While he was talking, Fox News surprised everyone by calling Arizona for Biden, which is not surprising because Fox News is a liberal, basically a liberal, fake conservative entity now. The public awareness campaign had worked, Podzer thought. TV anchors were bending over backwards to counsel caution and frame the vote count accurately. See, that what he's not saying outwardly in that statement, he's saying kind of covertly in that statement, is that the TV anchors were bending over backwards to predict or to keep talking about, make sure that counting is right, make sure that the vote count is accurate, because they knew that the people voting the counting the votes were liberal, and they knew that there was something up. They knew, a lot of these people probably knew that something was going on. They knew what Podzer knew. So they go on TV, just like this article is written in such a way as to reflect them in a good light. That's what the anchors were doing. They were out there kind of leading towards this victory, and you could see it all night. It wasn't like in 2016 and 2017 when those elections occurred. You know, it wasn't like that. It wasn't like that presidential election where the people really showed up in such a mass and they weren't quite ready because they really thought Hillary Clinton was going to win. So they didn't have this game. They didn't have the same opera that they were playing out in 2020. So the conversation that followed was a difficult one. This is very interesting. This is going to show you the speed at which they work. So the conversation went on. This is Podzer trying to talk to the other people on this Zoom call, which again was early in the evening, right before all the spike and all this stuff. So he's trying to calm everybody down, which again is very predictive of him because the spike hadn't occurred yet, where Joe Biden suddenly just jumped out of the roof with the win. And this odd thing that happened. Odd is a good word for it. So the conversation that followed was a difficult one, Podzer says, led by the activists charged with the protest strategy, saying, we want to be mindful of when was the right time to call for moving masses of people into the streets. So they had already planned on this, right? They had that in reserve to move these masses of people into the street to protest and to riot and to destroy things, which is crazy because when I'm reading this and I reflect on from January 6th to now on how the media covers that and how the Democrats covered that, how they brought Trump up and tried to impeach him again based on January 6th, they were planning their own same thing, right? They had that in reserve to go hog wild, and which was basically if Trump was going to win, they were going to burn it down, which is no different. Sedition, insurrection, whatever you want to call it. Their goal, really it's terrorism, their goal, if Trump won, was to burn it down and to cause as much chaos as possible. I'm sure they were willing to destroy it all. So as much as they were eager to mount a show of strength, mobilizing immediately could backfire and put people at risk. Protests that devolved into violent crashes would give Trump a pretext to send in federal agents and troops as he had over the summer. And this story, and there's liberals that are reading this saying, yeah, Trump sent in troops and federal agents all over the place. That is not the case. In fact, the ones that were in Portland were basically worthless. They never actually did anything. The protests are still going. The riots are still going on in Portland. Destruction is still happening in Portland. And the troops that were sent out in Washington, D.C. did relatively nothing. In fact, a lot of them in the several different places that they were at were taking knees with the protesters. So it didn't really do anything. So the story goes on. And rather than elevate Trump's complaints by continuing to fight him, the alliance wanted to send the message that the people had spoken. See, now they're all allied together, and they shifted. Instead of violence, right, they held their ground, which is why you get the title of this, which is showing up and standing down. They had decided to not to do anything and to start pushing the narrative that the people had spoken. I mean, the undertones of this whole story are basically showing you that they knew deception was there. There's no way they could have predicted this stuff before before midnight when all this stuff started changing. There's no way they knew that. So saying that the people were spoken was a predetermined narrative. It was either going to be violence or the people have spoken. One of the two. Because, if Trump had won, that wouldn't have been the people have spoken, right? That would have been the beginning of violence because, and that's the difference between the right and the left. They would have said Trump stole it. It was rigged, or, he won this vote, but, electoral college, but not the popular vote, or whatever they would have said. And they would have started destroying everything because that's the way they work. They would have done that. They didn't have to. And then they turn around, they blame the right of doing that exact thing. So the word went out, they say in the story. Protect the results. That's this group, right? Another group, another one of these activist leftist groups. Protect the results. Where did that group bounce up all of a sudden? So I guarantee when we look at the people who run all these activist groups are all associated, related, intermarried, just like the media and the Democrat Party. So Protect the Results announced that it would, quote, not be activating the entire national mobilization network today. That shocks me when I hear that, right? They actually have a national mobilization network. When has the right ever had a national mobilization network? They don't. So they said they wouldn't be activating that today. That was on election night, but remains ready to activate if necessary. They were ready to destroy stuff at the drop of a hat. Just say the word. And it's national. That should freak you out hearing this. On Twitter, outraged progressives wondered what was going on, they say. And I can see that, right? Because these people at the top are organized, these people on the left, and then you have all the rest of the useful idiots. You can actually input that when they say progressives. You could just say useful idiots, the people who aren't actually in this. Their Twitter is their battlefield, and they were outraged. They didn't know what was going on. Why wasn't anyone trying to stop Trump's coup? They were saying, how do you commit a coup when you were already in charge? That's how stupid these people are. Where were all the protests? They were asking. Podzer credits the activists for their restraint. Quote, they had spent so much time getting ready to hit the streets by Wednesday, but they did it. And when he says they did it, he goes on to say, Wednesday through Friday, there was not a single Antifa versus Proud Boy incident like everyone was expecting. And when that didn't materialize, I don't think the Trump campaign had a backup plan. Now, here's what's interesting about that, right? I mean, there's a lot of things interesting about this. Well, first of all, Trump doesn't run the Proud Boys, and the Proud Boys aren't the ones who go out and start stuff. The Proud Boys came about because of Antifa. They organized as they were a drinking group, but they organized as a group of guys who would go out on the street and do battle with Antifa. So this whole narrative is so fake. But this is what useful idiots believe. So activists reoriented the Protect the Results, that's that group, protest towards a weekend of celebration. So they got to this point. They paused because that's how good their control and command is, or command and control. They paused and then they pivoted from protest to celebration. So you see the overwhelming strategy or the overwhelming effect of what happens. You have people that are planning a lie. You have people that carry out the lie. You have people that have command and control of the people. So they have plans. Are we going to riot and burn things down, or are we going to celebrate and shove it out there and be so loud that you cannot tell? It's like if two people were running to the finish line of a race and they were getting right up there to the edge, and the crowd surged and surrounded them, and then covertly held one guy and moved the other guy across the finish line and then celebrated, and the cameras couldn't tell what happened. And that's what they did. They just simply overwhelmed from every point of view, and they were able to, either riot or celebrate. And because it started working out the way that they thought it would, they celebrated. Counter their disinfo with our confidence and get ready to celebrate, read the messaging guidance Shinker Osorio presented to the Liberal Alliance on Friday, November 6th. Quote, declare and fortify our win. Vibe, confident, forward-looking, unified, not passive, anxious. The voters, not the candidates, would be the protagonists of the story. They would be the heroes. So they made the voters the heroes immediately. That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to make, throughout all this, to, instead of taking, the win for themselves and celebrating for themselves, they turned around, and part of this entire counter intel type of narrative was to make the people the hero. So the planned day of celebration happened to coincide with the election being called on November 7th. Activists dancing in the streets of Philadelphia blasted Beyonce over an attempted Trump campaign press conference. This is, again, what they're saying in the article. The Trumpers, and they try to make the Trump people sound like they're as organized as they are. And this is another thing that they do. Whatever they are, they accuse the right of, right? Well, the right is not organized at all. I mean, you saw January 6th. I mean, if people actually did show up to actually take over government, they didn't do a good job of it at all. At all. I mean, they failed in every sense of the word. Just the same. I say the same thing about Al-Qaeda when they, took down the Twin Towers and hit the Pentagon and caused the entire world to change. They never had a follow-up attack. Failed on their part. Failed. This huge terrorist victory on their part, and they never did anything else to follow it up. It's the same thing here. I don't get it. I find things fishy, right? And the more I look at January 6th, the more fishy it gets. People go in, they're convinced to go in by people who tell them go into the Capitol and do these things. They get in there and they didn't do anything. They didn't even show up prepared to do anything. It's the same thing with any other group of people who try to start trouble and have no real resolve. Listen, you want to stand up, and I'd say this to the left and the right, and I would have to say that the left actually has this down pat more than the right. You want to stand up for what you believe in, right or wrong. It's always going to be right in your mind. Everybody wants to be a warrior until it's time to be a warrior. So, the left has this ability to manipulate people into believing their crap and move people from left to right and get them to do these things. And that's why they're so good at it. They have a really close, tight-knit command and control, money flow, logistics. It's ran just like any other intel military operation. So they try to make the Trump people look ridiculous in this. And they said the Trumpers' next confab was scheduled for 4 seasons total landscaping outside the city center, which activists believe was not coincidental. The people of Philadelphia own the streets of Philadelphia, so the stuff just didn't work out. The votes had been counted. Trump had lost, but the battle wasn't over. Now, I was going to wrap this all up in tonight's show, but I'm going to save the very last part of this for tomorrow's show, because it's kind of long. Actually, there's 2 more parts, and kind of finish out this story and exactly what the left, how they swept this victory, and the reality of what this story is actually confessing to. The biggest thing, though, that I hope that you take out of this show today is the reality of how organized that the left actually is, and the reality of how these types of operations are carried out. Now, I don't care if you're liberal or conservative, or you call yourself a Republican versus a Democrat. It doesn't matter. You have to remember this. Don't worship politicians or Hollywood celebrities or activists. Don't worship them, right? They always have their best interests at heart, not yours. What you have to do is look for people of integrity that have solutions and real character. And remember these 3 things. If someone has to cheat to win, they will always be dependent upon cheating. If they have to rig a system in order to gain control of the system, their system will never work. And if they have to manipulate people in order to gain power, they will always be a manipulator and never a leader. I'm Jonathan Gilliam. This is The Experts. The truth has arrived. Peace, and I'm out of here.